Welcome to episode 19 of The Evidence Room. Inside every investigation, the truth is hidden in the evidence.
hmm
We've been to South Korea before, to the rice paddies of Hwaseong, where a killer operated for years and left nothing behind. Tonight we go back, but this time we're in the heart of modern Seoul. This time, the killer had a list.
Yeah, it is, it's just a completely chilling premise. And to really grasp the scale of the horror, we have to look closely at the landscape where this all unfolded.
Right.
So we're taking a deep dive into the story of Yoo Young-chul, who would basically become South Korea's most prolific serial killer. But, this isn't just a story about a violent mind.
No, it's really not.
Right, it's a study of how someone weaponized his own personal failures, taking them and transforming them into this highly calculated campaign of, well, class hatred and misogyny.
Exactly. And I think to understand that, you have to imagine walking the streets of Seoul in 2003. It's this bustling, hyper-modern metropolis, like visually cinematic.
Right, lots of neon lights, rapid development everywhere.
Yeah, but underneath all that, there's this profound societal fracture. The country is still reeling from the devastating 1997 Asian financial crisis. Locals often just call it the IMF crisis.
And that crisis, it practically evaporated the middle class overnight.
It really did.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the gap between the ultra-rich and affluent districts and the grindingly poor, it wasn't just some distant economic statistic anymore. It was starkly, painfully visible on every single street corner.
Absolutely, that resentment just sort of hung in the air, and operating right in the middle of that fractured landscape was Yoo Young-chul.
So our mission with this deep dive is to look beyond just the gruesome details of his crimes, right?
Right, we really want to examine the systemic blind spots that allowed a monster like this to thrive for so long.
Yeah, we'll explore the institutional mechanics of this heavily siloed police force and the profound irony that ordinary marginalized citizens ultimately had to be the ones to stop him.
Not to mention the really heavy moral questions that his continued survival forces the nation to confront today.
Right, exactly. So let's start at the beginning, because the origin of this rage doesn't just begin in 2003. A killer like this doesn't just, materialize out of thin air holding a weapon.
No, not at all. He was born in 1970 into crushing poverty in a rural area called Gyeongsang County.
And from his earliest memories, poverty completely defined his existence.
It did. But here's the crucial part for his psychological development. He lived right next door to a very wealthy family.
Oh, wow. That's a stark contrast.
Yeah, for a child growing up with absolutely nothing, observing that kind of localized wealth every single day, it didn't just inspire passing envy, it laid the foundation for this simmering, lifelong jealousy.
Right, and as he grew up, that resentment slowly curdled into this absolute rigid hostility toward the rich.
Exactly, and rather than channeling that frustration into, say, upward mobility, he spent his young adulthood just building up this staggering resume of failure.
Yeah, by the time we reach his release from prison in September 2003, he already has 14 criminal convictions on his record. 14. We're talking theft, forgery, burglary, identity theft, and eventually a conviction for child rape.
God, that's horrific.
He'd already spent 7 years of his life behind bars, so the system knew exactly who he was.
They did, yeah. The prison system knew him as a chronic, low-level offender. But during that final stint in prison, something shifted.
What do you mean?
Well, the disorganized, impulsive criminal kind of evolved. When he was released in 2003, he didn't just walk out and snap in a fit of passion. It was the meticulousness of his planning that really stands out.
Right, he immediately set about procuring weapons, but he wasn't satisfied with what he could just, buy off a shelf at a hardware store.
No, he actually engineered his weapon. He took a really heavy 4-kilogram sledgehammer and customized it.
Wait, a sledgehammer?
Yeah, he shortened the handle specifically so he could swing it indoors without clipping the ceiling.
Wow.
And he altered the grip so it wouldn't slip from his hands during an attack. He even practiced his swing by killing neighborhood dogs.
No, gee.
Yeah, just to calibrate his physical force. That is a terrifying level of premeditation.
It really demonstrates this forensic awareness of his own physical limitations.
Right.
And the environments he planned to enter.
Absolutely. And the delay between his release and his first strike was incredibly short. Just 13 days after walking out of prison, he unleashed this calibrated violence.
13 days, that's nothing.
It's nothing. He targeted Sinsadong, which is a highly affluent, exclusive neighborhood in Seoul. He broke into a 2-story home and bludgeoned a 72-year-old university professor and his 68-year-old wife to death.
And over the next 2 months, he repeats this exact pattern, right? Hunting wealthy senior citizens in the most affluent districts of the city.
Yeah, and he later claims to the media that this was a righteous crusade. He completely framed himself as this dark vigilante, bragging that he was punishing society and the rich for their greed.
But looking at the actual victimology, I have to push back on his own narrative there. Sneaking into homes during the day to bludgeon elderly people in their 70s and 80s who physically cannot fight back. That isn't a revolution.
No, it's cowardly rage masking itself as ideology.
Exactly. He was specifically targeting the weakest possible physical targets.
And that distinction is really crucial for understanding his pathology. He desperately craved the grand narrative of being an avenging angel, an anti-hero taking on the establishment.
When in reality, his methodology was entirely opportunistic and predatory.
Spot on. But what baffled the police wasn't his ideology, it was his countermeasures. He was highly aware of how investigators are trained to think.
Right, he would stage these incredibly bloody crime scenes to look like robberies gone wrong. He'd pull out drawers, toss valuables around the room, leave the house in total disarray.
But he never took a single dime.
Never. And that's brilliant in a really dark, twisted way, because it completely derailed the standard investigative playbook.
Because detectives are fundamentally trained to look for motive. When a scene presents as a staged robbery, but there is absolutely no financial theft, the investigation just stalls.
Right. The police were searching for a thief who had panicked and escalated to murder. They were totally blind to the possibility of a serial killer acting out some class warfare fantasy.
And you went to extreme lengths to protect that illusion and his identity. During one home invasion, he murdered a wealthy man and his housekeeper, but he accidentally cut himself while trying to force open a safe to make the robbery look authentic.
Oh, wow. So he left blood.
Yeah, and the moment he realized he had bled at the scene, he didn't just flee, he set the entire house on fire, literally burning it to the ground to destroy his DNA.
The presence of mind required to do that, knowing the authorities are likely already on their way, is just chilling.
It really is.
But eventually, the intense police heat around these wealthy neighborhoods becomes too much. The patrols increase, the risk outweighs the reward, and the killings in those affluent areas stop.
Right. But avoiding the police wasn't enough to sustain him. When his external targets became too risky, his rage just turned inward, toward his own personal rejections.
And this is where his victimology undergoes a massive thematic pivot. He stops hunting the rich, and he starts targeting women.
Yeah, the shift is basically a collision of that external law enforcement pressure and his own internal psychological collapse.
How so?
Well, right as the wealthy neighborhoods became fortified, his personal life imploded. He had been dating a woman who worked as an escort, and when she discovered the sheer volume of his criminal past, she rejected him.
Understandably.
Right. And compounding this, his ex-wife, who had divorced him a few years prior, had also been a massage parlor worker.
So for a narcissist with a fragile ego, these rejections from women he deemed socially beneath him were just intolerable.
Exactly. The generalized simmering anger he held toward society instantly sharpened into this hyper-focused violent misogyny.
And this changes everything about how he operates. March 2004 really marks the beginning of a terrifying new phase. It's like an ambush predator changing its camouflage.
That's a great way to put it.
Instead of breaking into fortresses, he creates a trap. He stops going out into the world to hunt. He brings the prey directly to his front door. He begins calling female sex workers, luring them to his apartment in the Malpoku district.
Right, because he fundamentally understood and exploited the inherent vulnerabilities of sex work in South Korea at that time.
Right.
These women operated in a gray area of the law, which meant they possessed a deep ingrained fear of law enforcement. So when these women arrived near his home, you would intercept them on the street.
And he had props, right?
He did. He utilized a fake ID and a pair of handcuffs he'd purchased at a local market to actually pose as a police officer.
Oh, that's vile. He weaponized their marginalization against them.
Exactly.
He threatened them with arrest and public exposure to force their compliance, quietly coercing them into his apartment and ultimately into his bathroom.
And the brutality of what happened in that space is it's almost difficult to articulate. He didn't just murder them with that same custom sledgehammer, he systematically dismantled them.
Oh, God.
He dismembered the victims into 16 to 18 pieces.
16 to 18 pieces.
Yes, and he carefully cut off their fingertips to ensure that even if the bodies were found, police couldn't use fingerprint identification. Then he packed the remains in garbage bags and buried them in the mountains near Bangwon Temple.
So the forensic countermeasures were extensive. He was systematically erasing these women from existence, making sure they could never be traced back to them.
He was. He even later claimed to have consumed parts of his victims, stating he believed the act of cannibalism would, quote, cleanse his spirit.
Cleanse his spirit. Unbelievable.
Whether those claims were physically true or simply another mechanism to inflate his own terrifying mythos, they highlight the absolute dehumanization of his victims. He killed at least 11 women between May and July of 2004.
But wait, the sheer logistics of luring women to an apartment, murdering them, and carrying their dismembered bodies out in garbage bags over and over again without getting caught immediately, that points to a massive failure somewhere in the system, right? How did he operate with such impunity?
Well, the failure was entirely systemic, and it was deeply rooted in the rigid architecture of the South Korean police force at the time.
Okay, break that down for us.
The police operated in these incredibly strict, localized silos. A precinct in Mapogu had virtually no communication with a precinct in Gangnam-gu.
Oh, wow.
And this wasn't just poor infrastructure, it was a cultural issue deeply tied to institutional pride and career advancement.
Oh, because promotions were tied to clearance rates.
Right, exactly. Promotions were heavily tied to a precinct's closure rate, so sharing information about an unsolved murder meant officially logging a failure on your precinct's record. Consequently, out of a desperate need to save face, detectives actively hid their unsolved cases from other districts.
That is maddening.
Yeah.
So you have isolated pockets of law enforcement, each staring at their own individual puzzle pieces, actively refusing to look at the big picture.
Right.
And let's be honest about the societal dynamics here too. The victims were women working on the margins of society. When an escort goes missing, it tragically barely registered on the official police radar. He found the perfect invisible victims.
He really did. He banked on the assumption that society just wouldn't look for them. He assumed their disappearances would be written off as transient women simply moving on.
And
Yeah.
sadly, he was kind of right about society. But he fundamentally miscalculated the localized network of their employers.
Yes, he did.
The most tragic irony of this entire case is who actually caught him. It wasn't brilliant behavioral analysis or sweeping forensic detective work by the state. It was a network of massage parlor owners.
Yeah, the pimps, basically.
Right. They noticed a terrifying pattern that the police were entirely blind to. Their employees were heading out to specific calls and simply vanishing into thin air.
And because these parlor owners actively communicated with each other to protect their bottom line and their workers, they realized something profound.
The phone number.
Yes. The exact same phone number had called each of the missing women right before they disappeared.
It's wild to think that the criminal underworld possessed better pattern recognition, data sharing, and urgency than the official law enforcement apparatus.
It really is. So when the killer called a parlor again in July 2004, the owners instantly recognized the digits. They knew exactly who was on the other end of the line.
Right, so they actually do the right thing and alert the police. They set up a sting operation at an arranged meeting location, basically handing the authorities the worst serial killer in the country on a silver platter.
They did.
And what follows is a staggering, almost comical display of institutional incompetence.
The police response truly defies belief. Warned that a man is likely abducting and killing multiple women, the department dispatches a single officer to the scene to intercept him.
One officer.
One single officer. And before the killer even arrives, that sole police officer simply leaves his post.
He abandons the sting operation. I still can't get over that.
Me neither.
So when Yoo Young-chul casually walks into the location, expecting to abduct another victim, it isn't the police who surround him, it is the massage parlor employees who physically detain him on the street.
Right, they're the ones who finally catch the monster.
But the chaos doesn't end with his capture, does it?
Not at all. Once the parlor owners hand him over to the police station, Yoo demonstrates how effectively he can manipulate authority. He had boasted to the media later about having an IQ of 140, and he used that cunning in custody.
Right.
Sitting in the interrogation room, he suddenly starts convulsing, faking a severe, life-threatening epileptic seizure.
And what's infuriating is that he had used this exact same trick successfully 2 years prior to escape a rape charge. It should have been a massive red flag in his file.
It should have been, but the officers were entirely unprepared. They panic, assume it's a genuine medical emergency, and actually remove his handcuffs to treat him.
Oh, you have got to be kidding me.
Nope. And the moment his hands are free, he simply stops convulsing, shoves past them, and runs right out the front door of the police station.
Wow.
He escapes custody entirely and goes on the run for 12 frantic hours before a random patrol officer finally manages to spot and recapture him on the street.
Okay, so once he is finally secured, the investigation shifts from capture to comprehension. And this is where we get a horrifying look inside the mind of a psychopath.
Very horrifying.
The confession he provides is just chilling in its casualness. He sits down with detectives and confesses to 26 murders.
Though the court eventually convicts him of 20, throwing one out that was later linked to a completely different killer.
Right. But throughout the process, he shows an absolute void of remorse. He looks directly at the media cameras and brags, stating, quote, "Women shouldn't be sluts and the rich should know what they've done."
Yeah.
He flatly admits that if he hadn't been caught by the pimps, his goal was to kill 100 people.
And, his public demeanor triggered a massive cultural and criminological milestone for South Korea. Before Yoo, the public and law enforcement largely believed that murder required a tangible, easily understood reason.
Like what?
Well, the traditional Korean framework for violent crime was rooted in wonhan, which is a deep-seated, specific personal grudge or extreme financial desperation or a crime of passion. The sheer randomness of his violence, his profound lack of empathy, and that bizarre, grandiose ideological justification he offered, they were completely alien.
It forced an immediate paradigm shift in how the country understood evil.
Exactly. The psychological dissonance was so great that the criminal profiler working the case, Lee Soo-jung, had to go on national television and publicly use the term psychopath for the very first time in the country's history.
Because the public simply didn't have the behavioral science vocabulary to process what they were looking at.
Right. Introducing that concept shattered the traditional motive-based perception of crime in Korea. It forced the realization that a killer could be driven by deep-seated psychological dysfunction and an antisocial worldview rather than, a quantifiable grievance.
And there are two specific anecdotes from his time in custody that perfectly illustrate that total lack of empathy.
Which ones are you thinking of?
Well, first, the families of some of his victims, acting out of a capacity for grace that I honestly cannot even fathom, requested a meeting with him to seek some kind of closure or reconciliation.
Oh, right.
He categorically refused. Instead, he sent a message offering to describe the murders of their loved ones to them in graphic, agonizing detail.
God. It was an act of pure malice. He was actively weaponizing their grief. Even from behind bars, he needed to maintain absolute psychological dominance and inflict pain.
Yeah. And the second detail involves a series of letters he wrote to a reporter from prison. The reporter asked him what the scariest moment of his entire crime spree was. You would assume it was the moment the parlor owners grabbed him on the street, or maybe the physical, visceral act of dismembering a body.
But it wasn't.
No. He wrote that the most terrifying moment was when he was in his bathroom, elbow deep in gore, actively mutilating a corpse, and his cell phone rang. It was his 4-year-old son calling, simply to ask if his dad still had a cold.
The psychological concept of compartmentalization on display there is just staggering.
It really is.
His brain allowed him to completely detach from the humanity of the woman he had just slaughtered on his bathroom floor. Yet the sudden intrusion of his normal domestic life, the sound of his child's voice, sent a jolt of genuine fear through him.
Yeah.
The dissonance between the atrocity he was committing and the mundane reality of his fatherhood really highlights the deeply fractured nature of his psyche.
But there is a final psychological twist to his time in prison. For all his ghosting to the media and his stated goal of 100 victims, his mind hasn't entirely escaped the consequences of that bathroom.
No, it hasn't. Recently, a former corrections officer who conducted weekly interviews with you for years revealed something fascinating about his condition.
What did he say?
Well, despite his outward bravado and his absolute refusal to show remorse to the public or the families, he suffers from chronic, severe insomnia. He complained to the guards that he cannot sleep because every single night, the ghosts of 3 or 4 of his victims appear on the ceiling of his prison cell bathroom, staring down at him in the dark.
They appear in the bathroom.
Yes.
The exact same type of room where he dismantled their lives. It's almost Shakespearean in its retribution.
It really is. It suggests that even in a mind that is clinically categorized as psychopathic and completely devoid of conscious empathy, the subconscious just cannot completely evade the profound weight of such horror. The human mind, no matter how broken, fractures under the reality of what it has done.
Wow. You know, the aftermath of a trauma this massive inevitably changes a country. It left a deep cultural scar on South Korea. The sheer incompetence of the police force, juxtaposed with the gritty, terrifying reality of the crimes, Heavily inspired, the massive 2008 box office hit The Chaser.
Oh yeah, phenomenal film.
Yeah, and more recently, a 2021 Netflix docuseries explored the systemic failures of the hunt. But practically speaking, the blood of these victims forced a real reckoning.
It did. The Korean police were forced to entirely dismantle those corrupt, inefficient silos we talked about earlier. They implemented better cross-jurisdictional communication protocols and finally recognized the critical, mandatory need for behavioral analysis and criminal profiling in their ranks.
So the institutional reforms were necessary, but they don't resolve the ultimate moral dilemma of the case, which is the punishment.
Right.
In December 2004, Yoo was found guilty and legally sentenced to death by hanging. However, this raises a profound question about the application of justice in South Korea today.
Because while he was handed a death sentence, the country is what Amnesty International classifies as abolitionist in practice.
Meaning they don't actually execute anyone?
Exactly. South Korea has not actually carried out an execution since December 1997.
So for 2 decades, he has remained securely locked in a cell. He is currently one of 59 living death row inmates in the country. And his mere existence acts as a constant polarizing lightning rod for the national debate on the death penalty.
Right. Whenever abolitionists argue that the state should not have the power to kill, proponents point directly to his cell and ask how justice is served by keeping him alive.
And a recent poll showed that 69% of the South Korean public supports bringing executions back, largely driven by the cultural memory of monsters exactly like him.
Yeah.
And that overwhelming public sentiment makes a recent administrative move by the government incredibly significant.
Right, because just recently, the Ministry of Justice transferred Yoo from a regional detention facility to the Seoul Detention Center. And while they officially classified it as a routine administrative transfer, the specifics of that facility are just impossible to ignore.
Wait, Seoul Detention Center, isn't that the only facility in the country fully equipped with a functional execution chamber?
It is.
That cannot be a coincidence.
Criminal psychology professors and legal experts universally agree that it is not. It is widely viewed as a highly calculated, deliberate signal from the government.
Wow.
Yeah, by moving the country's most notorious serial killer to the exact facility housing the gallows, they are reminding the public and the inmates themselves that the long-dormant execution chamber is maintained, it's functional, and it could theoretically be opened again.
It's like a shadow hanging over the entire cell block.
Completely.
And it leaves us with a lingering philosophical question. Does keeping a man like him alive in a tiny cell for decades, complaining that he is haunted every single night by the ghosts of his victims staring down at him from the ceiling, does that serve as a greater, more agonizing punishment than the quick drop of a rope? Or does a society ultimately fail its victims by leaving a legally mandated death sentence unfulfilled? Thanks for listening to The Evidence Room. If you enjoyed this episode, like and subscribe for more true crime investigations from around the world. Remember, some cases remain unsolved, but the evidence always tells a story.